rejecting the opportunity to sign Julian Alvarez from River Plate is a damning indictment of David Moyes' judgment. I'm aware that David Moyes is down at the moment and it's easy to put the boot in, but I mean, let's be perfectly honest with you, he's loaded the gun here and he's fired it himself. For those of you who don't know, David Moyes has just done an interview. It's a podcast called Diary of a CEO podcast. A very popular podcast. He sat down, he's had a candid and frank interview, about an hour and a half long. About an hour and, actually no, I think it's about 40 odd minutes into the interview. The interviewer asks the question, have you had any regrets? I think the interviewer asks the question, who's the worst player you signed? David Moyes sort of bats it away, which I'd understand why he would do that. It's, you don't want to label somebody as your worst employee. And then he turns around and he said, no, I think it's the players that you miss out on, that you don't quite buy that go on to be successful. The ones. Let me read it to you. You have to excuse me. I'm all over the place. I've got notes and because I've just listened to the podcast. So David Moyes said to the interview, I think it's the ones I've missed out on, the ones where you say, no, I don't think he's quite good enough. I've had hundreds of them. He said, just recently, because we've been talking about it, Alvarez, who has just played for Argentina in the World Cup, I brought in a new scout. He's talking about West Ham here. He brought in a new scout at West Ham. And the scout said, look, you should go for Alvarez at River Plate. Moyes said, I watched him. I thought he was very good. He was a good technician. He's done so many good things as centre-forward, but I thought, maybe he's not quite the one I want. We had Mickey Antonio, had been doing very well. And I thought, I don't know. He then goes on to say, by the way, just to give the other side of the argument, that there have been lots of players who have been recommended to him who he didn't sign, who went on and achieved nothing. So just to be clear, this is an admission of that he turned down the opportunity to sign Julian Alvarez a year ago. Now, myself and Gio have already done a video on this, giving our instant reaction. What I'll do is I'll put links to the videos, to the podcast, and myself and Gio's video underneath this. And there'll be something on the end slate as well as video. I don't really want to just talk about that. So we gave our instant reaction to it. Now I've had a little bit more time to process what he said in the interview and listen to some more of the interview. I would imagine player judgment, judging a player's footballing ability, is, to state the obvious, is a massive part of being a football manager, right? And do you know what? If you can't do that, then what you do is you delegate that responsibility to a scout. If what you can't do is identify the talent you're not sure, then you employ someone to do it. David Moyes even admitted that. So I think it's quite clear. There's an old one that goes back. David Moyes turned down the opportunity to sign Gareth Bale. But I've always said when I heard that, well, every manager's got that. There are a number of players, number of managers, number of stories. Yaya Toure at Arsenal under Wenger. Zlatan Ibrahimovic at Arsenal under Wenger, apparently. In fact, one of them, maybe even Ibrahimovic, was on loan to us at the time. Wasn't under Moyes, not on loan, had a trial with us or something like that. Anyway, whatever. It's littered with them. So whenever I've heard the story, I have thought, it's an easy one to say. However, this is more relevant because this is now. This is 12 months ago. Where we were 12 months ago was on the cusp of a European trophy. We were top four in the Premier League. All of us. The wonderful thing about doing Hammers Chat is we have an archive. We have an archive of what we say on the videos. We have an archive of what you say when you write in the comments down below. Anybody can go and look back. Everybody was saying that we need to sign players. And in the last transfer window. We're about to get into the knockout stages of Europe, if you remember, top four in the Premier League. We were weak. We needed to strengthen. We had one striker. Everybody was worried about it. Mikel Antonio just decided that he was going to go and play international football for Jamaica, basically. We didn't know. When we tied Antonio down to his big contract and decided that we were going to go with just him, if you remember, he'd been called into an England squad before that. He decided international football wasn't for him. We thought he was going to be dedicated to West Ham. He changed his mind. There was a chance Jamaica might get to qualify for the World Cup, so he decided he qualified for Jamaica because of his parents and because he'd never made an appearance for England. So Then the rules changed, so we suddenly had this striker who wasn't just 100% committed to West Ham. We were flying him out on private jets, if you remember. He would go away on international duty. He'd play 3 games. He'd come back. Do you remember we would send a medic out with him and a whatever physiotherapist, whatever it was. The landscape had changed as far as West Ham and Mikel Antonio were concerned. So we were cutting it fine with one striker anyway. Now we had a striker who was going to fly off every now and again. And leave us in a position where when he returned, he was jet-lagged or not fit or whatever the case may be. We know David Moyes wanted a striker because he tried to bid for Darwin Núñez. But at the same time he was bidding for Darwin Núñez, a scout was recommending this guy, Julian Alvarez. If you don't know, I know you all do, but just in case there's 1% of you, 0.5% of you who don't know, Julian Alvarez signed for Manchester City, really good player. Played in the World Cup, scored 4 goals in the World Cup, something like that. Won the World Cup, basically. No secret, this is not hindsight. I said to Gio, actually, when we did our video earlier, if you go and watch, it was either the Man City build-up or the Man City preview before our first game of the season. And it's not just me saying it, by the way, everybody knew it. I only say me saying it because I'm sort of culpable for my own words, aren't I? I said in the build-up, that I really liked this player. When the point where Gio says any players you admire at Manchester City or talks about their activity in the transfer window, I said this is a really good player. My point is, if I know it, and I don't know that much about other clubs aside from West Ham at all, people would argue I don't know that much about West Ham. If I knew about him, everybody knew about him. This was an up-and-coming world-class star, and David Moyes decided not to sign him. Now, this is, I think this is crazy. One of the reasons that we did, and Gio touched on this in the video earlier, one of the reasons we signed Rob Newman from Manchester City was to, I think, basically to nick Manchester City's target list. What's the point of doing that if you're not going to sign any of them? I mean, it's absolutely crazy, really. Anyway, so it appears, and we don't know for certain, but it appears Rob Newman recommended Alvarez. There's a bit of ambiguity there, I think, really, because he referred to him as a scout. We don't know. Who knows? One thing I do know is what David Moyes was to go on and say. Because there's one thing that's really clear in all of this. If somebody as good as Julian Alvarez is going to have to play second fiddle to Mikel Antonio, what chance does a youngster have? What chance? You can see why Sonny Perkins left. Sonny Perkins left. Sonny Perkins already scored his first senior goal for Leeds. He wouldn't have been in that situation at West Ham. He just wouldn't have done. David Moyes went on to say, so this is after this point in the interview, he's talking about the culture at West Ham. And he said what he wanted to do at West Ham was he wanted to fill the team with exciting players, which in turn, exciting young players, is his phrase, exciting young players, and he may have to break the team up. Now, this is worth pointing out. I may have this wrong, but I believe 9 of the starting 11, as someone mentioned this on Patreon, 9 of the starting 11 that played Wolves were here 3 years ago. This is not an exciting new team, this is an old team. But what he said he wanted to do was he wanted there to be exciting players in the team, exciting young players, which would enable him to encourage youngsters to sign for West Ham. He said East London is a hotbed of untapped football talent. He wanted to entice the best young players to sign for West Ham United because they would have a look at it and think, that's a team I want to play for. I don't think he saw the contradiction in what he was saying, bearing in mind he'd turned down the opportunity to sign Alvarez. Let me just say this. This is worth pointing out. Moyes wasn't proud that he'd missed out on Alvarez. There was regret. He was admitting he'd made a mistake. Let's be absolutely fair to Moyes here, okay? He's admitting his mistake. However, you've got to be absolutely deluded to think that West Ham, that number one, he's broken up an old team and he's got young, vibrant players in there. And number two, to think that West Ham are attractive. And number three, West Ham have exciting young players in the team. Number three, to think that we're attractive to young players. We are not. I can't think of a worse club to join. If my son was good enough to play for West Ham United, do you know what? It's probably not a great example because I love West Ham and and Hammers Chat's my job and stuff like that, and it's probably not a great example. But if I was a parent of a youngster who had his choice of clubs, West Ham wouldn't be one I'd go to. I would just look at what's happened, the way we hemorrhage young players, the way young players don't want to stay here, the way young players don't have a chance in the first team. And I just wouldn't do it. It's a failure. The whole thing is a failure in scouting. And it only takes one link in the chain. That's the saying, right? A chain is as strong as its weakest link. But it is still failure within the scouting system.